So hi everyone. I hope you all had a good time watching that, and it maybe felt like even singing with that little child who was singing about the dragonfly, right? Yeah, in the chat window, I'd still love to know, even if you don't rank them, like which ones you didn't know about, which ones you knew about, all these different species, and what did you love most? What would you like more of? Because obviously GLF is going to do more such things, right? So let us know in the chat. And I'll move on to now introducing our next session, which is post-green. So how many of you are aware of this? Have you all heard of post-green? Or is this the first time that you're hearing of it? Let us know. So I'll tell you about my experience with this. The first time I heard the term, I was very curious. And after talking to Mr. Sivaramakrishnan, a number of times, I think I caught a few strands of it, but I'm not going to give it away. I'm going to actually tell you about the questions that, that kind of came to me when I heard of it. So like talking to him, it threw up questions like, is nature different from us, or are we part of nature too? And how does your lens change when you think of it like that? How did we arrive at this kind of concept? Because it reminds me of something like post-colonialism, but there might be a strand of that. I don't know, Mr. Murali will tell you. And what does it mean in real terms when we say something like post-green? There are lots of questions that, I was thinking about, and I'm going to let them tell you about it. And to lead our conversation today, we have someone who has a very who has something what you would call a very different specialty. He's an environmental economist. I didn't even know such a term existed, So yes, but he is an environmental economist, an entrepreneur, a green business mentor, writer, policy advocate, urban analyst, and one of the most awarded realtor CEOs with 50 awards from 4 different continents and 9 nations. He's the founder chairman of Biodiversity Conservation India Limited, Conservation India Limited, and founder of BCIL AltTech Foundation that works on zero energy development strategies for buildings, which essentially means building homes that are free from grid for energy, water, waste, and all of that. I'll be putting their links, links to their longer bios where you can read up more about them in the chat. So, y'all can get to know them better because they're very interesting people, both of them. And I'm going to allow Hari to do the honors of introducing Mr. Murali. So that's bye-bye from me, and let's have them.
Thanks, Pooja. I know it's not an easy job for you to do this business of anchoring and so on. Hi, Benedict Permanent. Nice to, sort of catch up with you again. And hi, Murali. Very nice to do that bit of exchange that we did in the last 2 days. And, when I saw that here was a man who worked or who was, he says he didn't actually get taught by C.D. Narasimha, but he had the privilege of having his doctoral paper sort of, checked by him and so on. This whole business of literature and environment, the time Pooja invited me to see that I joined this chat, the first thing that crossed my mind after I put the telephone down was that little monograph, I can't call it a book, that Amitabh Ghosh wrote called The Great Derangement, And in his first maybe 3-4 of these short little chapters that he writes, he talks about how and why there hasn't been anything as literary fiction that's, that sort of centers around the environment or of things to do with climate change. The climate change has been upon us for the last, say, 20 years, clearly. The debate moved into academia, I would think, by about the mid-1990s, and the word sustainability started gaining currency. If you looked at, say, in 1991, I remember, I was looking for a word, that could possibly capture things for a trust, to do with the environment that I was launching. And I suddenly found that only the OED had this word called sustainability defined. The Random House didn't have it. Cambridge didn't have it. Any of those dictionaries didn't have sustainability as a word. I guess that's changed in the last, say, 15 years or so. And this debate moved into industry, I would think, only by about early 2000. By 2010, technologies came in and so on. And today, well, if you're a business or you are into any of these spaces of creative or other, sorts of dimensions, you can't do without dealing with what is called climate change today. So my first question, or whatever, as a thought, let us say with Murali, is this: why on earth is it that writers have sort of kept away from, fiction that revolves around climate change and such things, although it's been upon us for the last, say, 20 years? Why do you think this has happened, Murali? Well, for instance, the book that you are working on, and which is still work in progress, I know, and I shouldn't be talking about it too much. The point is that even that is a work of nonfiction.
Yeah. Hello, everybody. Before we start this conversation on conservation, am I audible?
Yes.
Am I audible?
Absolutely, loud and clear.
Yeah. So I just wanted to, say a big hello to Hariharan, because we have communicated with each other. We haven't spoken to each other. In fact, I'm seeing you, and I was so excited in talking to you, because it's interesting to have a kind of a dialogue with a person who has been working in very practical in the field of praxis, which we have been theorizing about. And a big hello to Pooja and the entire crew of GLF. I'm so excited to be here. I'm really happy that they invited me, and we are collaborating. I'm representing an organization called ASLE, Association for the Study of Literature and Environment. And as we go on in our conversation, perhaps we'll be able to exchange this a little further down, because see, before I come to your question per se, in fact, I was just thinking, when we talk about Green Literature Festival, as a person who has been, as an academic, as a teacher who has been, discussing literature over almost 3 decades in several phases in theories and in the classroom and outside as a literary critic, I'm worried about these 2 aspects. One is literature of green, which, just like, when you are talking about chemistry or when you are talking about physics, you have a literature of chemistry, you have a literature of management, you have a literature of physics and astrophysics or cosmology. That is the whole bulk of the conversation that we will be having, because we'll be talking about green and that which, we will call it ecology, environment, and the writings on the environment from different fields, from economics, from political science, from social theory, from zoology, from biology, from cosmology, and that side. On the other hand, we have the green literature, or greening of literature, literary studies. In fact, literary studies has been in our part of the world in different languages, in our Bhasha Sahityam, in our classrooms in English literature, and in our classrooms in Sanskrit or any other language for that matter. The literature of of a country, of a culture, of a people, that has become green in many ways. That also is there. And many of us have been working in that greening aspect of literature. So there is this dialogic, a separate, possibility for talking about literature from the humanities perspective and from a very practical and economic perspective, or even a political or zoological perspective. Now, to come to a point which you raised, nowadays we talk a great deal about holistic healing and things of that kind. People are cured. People care for things and they look after each other. Human beings have to look after each other. Human beings have to look after nature, and we have curing. And we assume that, you can talk to each other, tell each other stories to cure, to make things better. We assume that imagination, or what we represent, we normally call fiction, novel, poetry, drama, cinema, music, and other things. They are all part of human imagination, human creativity. And we assume that, human creativity and its utterances, its expressions have in many ways been able to have a say on the physical aspect of the human being, right? So when we do that, we assume that, you take up a book and then you start reading, you assume that you become a better person. It can be fiction, it can be non-fiction. You can listen to some music, you can watch a cinema, you can watch theater, or even look at a sculpture or look at a painting. You become a better person, right? So we have fiction, which actually cures, fiction, which actually cares. So both these things are possible. So here, what happens is, am I audible?
Yeah, you are. Yeah.
No,
let me stop you there. Look at it like this. You talked about Bhasha Sahitya.
Yes.
You look at, say,
but Hari, I have not said anything about literary fiction for that matter. Okay,
not yet. But I'm saying, if you look at, let's say, Mrichakatika, you look at Shakuntala, for instance, there are phenomenal paragraphs which describe nature. But if you look at the last, say, 50 years and English writing in India, somewhere we have lost it. We don't seem to have anybody who's done, and I don't think it's just confined to India. I mean, across the world, we don't have too many people who have written anything at all, even to describe the sheer beauty and the tranquility of nature and such. While we have had a few exceptional paragraphs in books that you and I will remember, and many of the people here will remember. So to me, this whole question of, look at literary, let's say, vernacular literature. Look at B.V. Karth, look at Tagore, look at some of the writers from in Malayalam. This has been very alive and throbbing in vernacular literature, but not in English writing in India. There's something that's that's sort of missing here. What are you exploring, therefore, in the sort of book that you're putting together?
Yes. Now, see, as I said, there are several perceptions. One, you can start reading with an assumption that literature is something which will be descriptive.
Right.
Literature is something which will have a bearing on what you want. You want to take up a book on sunset and sunrise. You assume that sunset and sunrise will be described in that book. No, you can even take up, Moby Dick. And still, it will have a whole section on whaling and oceanography. But at the same time, you can read into things. It's not as if it's a question of perception. It's a question of perception. You cannot insist that English writers in India, well, I can reel off at least 10 novels and 10, works of in theater. People have explored the aspect of, nature and human being.
Right.
Nature being not per se as such. See, you will have one person who actually writes specifically about fishing, angling. Another person writing about, I myself have published many books on birds, specifically on birds, with drawings and sketches. I'm an ornithologist, by the way. So this sort of, there are so many people who write in English, in Malayalam, in Hindi, in Telugu, in Tamil, in Kannada, in Bengali, in Punjabi. This is actually what we, as an association, we are trying to raise
that reminds me of this.
No, Hari, I haven't completed. English is also an Indian language now.
So
English also has, well, anything written by Kenneth Anderson, for that matter, is about wildlife. Kenneth Anderson has written extensively on hunting. Dr. Salim Ali has himself produced, and right now I am reading a book of radio talks of Salim Ali, words on birds. So you can imagine this sort of, see, what I am trying to say is literature per se need not be what you consider in the library as literature section, fiction section. You can even be, you can go into oceanography session, or you can go to any other, even astrology for that matter. So Cosmos is a book on, on the cosmos. It also talks about, aspects of beauty for that matter. So there is no practical differentiation needed here. When we enter into this dialogue.
You talked about Salim Ali, many others. So you have to get back to why you believe we haven't had literary fiction, which is around climate change or the environment or ecology and such. Because there's a preponderance of the non-fiction variety, but not the fiction variety. Why is that? What do you think this is about?
I don't think it is right, because Amitav Ghosh will be very angry with me if I don't mention him. You know, Ghosh has written almost all his fictional works, for that matter.
Which is why I took his name first, you know. Yeah. But having said that,
you wanted specifically English. Then Ruskin Bond himself is a man who has lived in the mountains and he has been writing about it. But in our own language, you know, in Tamil and Malayalam, there are even people who live in the cities can write about. Janaki Raman's short stories have a reflection of what happens outside. See, the environment is always, it percolates everything that we do. It need not be mountains and birds alone. So that is what I feel.
Yeah. Fair enough. I see that.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, finally, every writer minds his own experience and then, you know, tries to see what aspect of that will bring that moment of recognition of nature for his reader or her reader.
Yeah.
I guess, in a sense, your process, what is happening in your mind on that book that you're putting together, will also be this, you know, counterpoise that you're seeking between what you're thinking and what you want your readers to sort of connect with, you know. Is there any intersect that of such a kind that you want to speak about it today, Murali? That's happening right now in your mind on that book?
Yeah. The book which I am actually editing, or we have already, with a colleague of mine, we already sent it to press. It's a book which we have titled Post Green, and that perhaps is what Pooja has caught on. You know, when she asked, what is it that I'm... See, we have worked on several other books earlier. We have talked about, you know, as I mentioned, you know, as academics for the last 20 years, you know, we have been having seminars, conferences, editing books on nature in different ways, nature and human nature, for that matter. You know, that was my earliest book, which happened in 2005. And then eventually we moved into what we consider ecological criticism as a theory in the English classroom, or in the humanities classroom, for that matter, or in the social sciences classrooms, academia, which actually touches upon the world outside. We call it eco-criticism, you know, eco-critical theories, or ecological writings, environmental writings. Here I would pause to mention one specific difference. You know, we have something called writing for nature and writing on nature. Writing on nature is what, you know, people see the sunset, or even Walden, for that matter, Thoreau's Walden. Walden, or, you know, Walden is about a man who has lived for a long time in the wilderness. You know, Thoreau writes in that about, in a very descriptive way, and then engages with what happens in his mind. He is one person who has lived deliberately. In fact, there is one whole chapter called Living Deliberately in the Wilderness. So American wilderness, for that matter, Thoreau or Emerson, who influenced very practical, you know, very involved workings like Mahatma Gandhi and several others who worked here in this field of environmental justice and people's movements. You know, they have taken off from what these people have been thinking. And Thoreau and Emerson was actually influenced by Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita and Vedas, for that matter. Incidentally, you know, a few days ago, I just had a very serious, in fact, I had given a series of talks on a work by Sri Aurobindo Ghosh. I'm sure you know him. Aurobindo's Savitri. And the strangest thing is, I have spoken about, you know, ecological awareness or environmental awareness, you know, dimensions of nature in Savitri. So Savitri is one of the longest works in the English language, for that matter. In fact,
what a wonderful,
it is the longest.
I mean,
so we have several writers connecting to our roots, you know, in our own cultural context as well. So it is not merely to reach outside, but I just mentioned Thoreau as a kind of, you know, a biblical figure in the environmental history.
Since we have as many discerning listeners there who are themselves leaders in their own right, it's very uncanny that you mentioned Thoreau. You will, of course, remember Aldo Leopold, 1910, 1920. Who wrote the Sand County Almanac. Yeah, absolutely. And then, you know, you mentioned Gandhi, but then, you know, if you look at what happened here between, let's say, 1920 and about 1970, when Alvin Toffler came in, suddenly Toffler, with his future shock and the third wave and such, he was moving away from environment into the ecological aspect of it. Silent Spring, for instance, Rachel Carson, 1963. Again, she's moving towards the ecological aspects of it from the environment aspects of it. You talked about wilderness, for instance. By 1971, 1973, we already have the Chipko movement, and ecological activism has been, sort of very deeply marking anything to do with environmental aspects in India. When Pooja said environmental economist, I said, no, it's more an ecological economist and not an environmental economist, because, the environment, it's fine, in the great outdoors that you have in, say, Russia or in the United States or such, but in India, with the kind of population pressure that we have, with 1/10 the landmass that we have as against Africa, with the same population, it has been, more the ecological variety. If you look at everybody, up right until, let us say, Meda Patka, as I wrote in that little mail that we both exchanged. I'm saying, therefore, from your point of view, when you look at, this post-green as an anthology, how much of it is environmental and how much of it is ecological?
I'm glad you made this discrimination, because I remember that many of the students who sat in my class, incidentally, I had given a whole course for over 15 years in Pondicherry University called Green Voices, where I have used, Sand County Almanac and Thoreau and Emerson and Mahatma Gandhi and Meda Patkar and Vandana Shiva and several other writers in the present, just to bring in environmentalism, as you mentioned, and ecological kind of awareness and environmental activism. I have brought in all these aspects together, and we have tried to, it's always good to get the feedback from students, because they make you think. It's not enough to read, but you have to bring in some fresh awareness, and they have been able to bring. So they have told me, in fact, they have taught me, or I have realized through these classes, as you mentioned, that the real challenge when we try to, make these sort of connections and looking at the east or west or north or south is not merely in identifying or even locating these levels of awareness. It's deciding how to make connections, and to have a kind of contact. I was strangely enough, I tried to tune into the inaugural session of this GLF, and by the time I tuned in, almost the inaugural person, somebody from overseas, I'm not sure who it was, but he was just signing off. He was a writer, and he was telling us that it's important to make connection and contact. I'm so impressed by that, because the entire theory that we in Association for Study of Literature and Environment, overseas as well as here, it's a big international organization, and we are part of the Indian organization. We have all been interested in finding connections and making conversations, conservation and conversation. So the whole point of engagement, and that is which actually the thing which helps us go back to our cultural context and cultural roots.
Sure.
So these recognition of the cultural roots in the context of the green awareness, ecological sense, and a kind of activism is what is required. And that brings us this fiction, non-fiction, that discrimination, and the whole borderlands will actually fall. There is no difference between writing nature and writing for nature, because it crosses the boundaries. You become engaged with everything.
Okay, I'll let me see if I can provoke you with this question. You talked about praxis in the beginning. Yeah. And, I was quoting from Amitabh Ghosh when I talked about this moment of recognition as a phrase, yeah. when you make that interface with nature or with the environment or whatever it is. What if I were to ask you this question? When you see a gleaming metal and glass kind of high-rise building, what happens to you? When you see a Burj Khalifa or whatever, or some such building in, say, Chennai, what is that first thing that strikes you, Murali?
Well, to be honest with you, I'm an artist first. I'm a sensitive aesthete first, and then an environmentalist, an intellectual. Sure. So as a first impression would be, I can even see the beauty of it, because there is nothing that is odd, nothing that is extraordinary in nature. Because for me, Everything is nature. There is a holistic kind of thing. Nothing is ugly for that matter. Even this high-rise building, as you very wisely put it, it could be horrible. It will stand against the sky. But like Qutub Minar or the Taj Mahal, there is a sense of identity in the present because we live in this kind of square, and closing the sky by 10 to 10 in the small rooms and rectangular kind of things. So for our aesthetic sense,
but do you see the ugliness? Do you see the ugliness behind such a building? Of
certainly.
The quantum of steel and concrete
but
and
glass. I
I
didn't want to sound so rude to the person who built it.
That's okay. I could take another example. For example, and we are past the half time. Let's see how we can, sort of get some things out of this. Let's say you are in a weekend resort on the banks of a very, very large water body called a reservoir of a very large dam. It's sylvan, it's tranquil, it's serene, and yet you can only think of the millions of species of whatever living things that were, sort of inundated with the flooding, with the impounding of water that they would have done. So, whenever I'm asked to go to some such place, I sort of refuse to go because, what I see is not, the waters and the beauty of the landscape there, but I see the ugliness of things there. Is that how you would want to see it in either the art or the literary form? That you explore.
Certainly, there is beauty, there is ugliness. There is no doubt about it. I have even, read poets, artists, and philosophers write excellently, enjoying, aesthetically enjoying the beauties of nature. Even Wordsworth, for that matter, he has written not merely as a nature poet, as a person who can see even human natural forms.
Sure.
John Keats. I don't want to sound like in the English romanticism classroom. John Keats has said, nature is fine, but human nature is finer. W.B. Yeats has written extensively about the beauty of, although he hates Dublin, he couldn't stand it. He has done that. James Joyce has written innumerable, the number of words which he is able to put together. So when you read, you don't make any discriminations like that because we human beings leave our imprints on nature because we assume, whether it's a building or it's a work of art or a theatrical performance or a musical piece, we are able to leave something. Similarly, an architectural marvel or even a kind of, when you are moving something away, I'm sure that you are killing the fish, you are killing the amphibians, you are killing multiple, organisms there, but you are able to create something. Well, this is not to say that I hate this thing, but sometimes, ugliness can get on your nerves. Sometimes you are very genial and you appreciate.
When you say nature is fine, human nature is finer, it somehow seems to me like those were writers who were from another world. And they, what we have done in the last, say, 40, 50 years, of course, with the kind of doubling up population or quadrupling our population from 1947, let's say, when we were 300 million to 1,200 plus million today, I suddenly say to myself, hey, what are we doing? Where is this imprint on nature at the benign level that you talk about to the savage levels of imprint that we are leaving today, which seems to have brought Earth to that, or us as the human species, to that point of no return. When you talk of art, to me, sometimes, it's art, all art forms, and forgive me for saying what I have to say now, all forms of art have to somewhere drive something that could make a person more humane. With the kind of wantonness that as users we have gotten, sort of get into with whether it's to do with the simple quotidian act of the use of water or the use of energy or anything else that we do in our lives, the use of air conditioners and such. Is there a way that, people like you who are exploring finer spaces, finer realms of expression, you shake and jerk people into some decent, response to the disaster that the near apocalypse that is before us? Is there something you can do about that?
Yeah. There have been fiction, there have been, innumerable non-fictional writings. in the form of poetry, in epical dimensions about the apocalyptic, as you very well mentioned, the end of the world sort of thing, the Holocaust, and about Anthropocene, as the geologists have seen it. It's not Anthropocene, but Anthropocene, the human-centered kind of thing, and the disaster fiction, post-man sort of thing. So in our own, even in our newsletters, we have listed innumerable sort of writing in different languages, in English, but without discriminating the high and the low, the high brow and the low brow kind of thing. Even here, I am slightly worried about that aspect which which you mentioned, because you specifically want a kind of placard or a board which says, okay, this is a book which is about post-human. This is a book which is about post-nature. This is a book about post-green. But then nothing happens like that. That is not mere propaganda. Writers are people, aesthetes, interior sort of people who actually engage with so many things. They are human beings, just like you and me. And they also have, their outside world, their inner world. They have to go to the market and buy whatever they want. They have to go for shopping. They have to look after their children. They have to educate each other. But at the same time, they can't just hold a board and say that, no, this is no exit. That is something which very rarely happens. Seldom does a book come out saying that, okay, this is about conservation, this is about preservation, or this is a book on deep ecology. It is for us to ferret out these sort of connections which happen. Of course, there have been books like that, innumerable books which actually come out with on the cover, this is a green book, this is a blue book, this is a yellow book, that sort of thing.
But always a writer or a filmmaker cringes when somebody says, so what is your book about? This about, it can be a terrible word for any creative person. I'm with you. I'm with you on that.
And somebody has mentioned Wilbur Smith. Wilbur Smith had a lot of wildlife conservation angle in his novels. Wonderful. He just passed away. And Wilbur Smith, of course, has done, When the Lion Feeds, and so many of his work, for that matter. Many South African writers, many East African writers, and even, Jim Corbett, for that matter. We should, you go to Corbett National Park, you always think about him. And without that, he was a conservationist towards the end of his life, when he wrote Treetops and other things. When the Queen visited India, he was writing Treetops. But earlier to that, he was a man who stalked animals with a gun. He was a hunter. Dr. Salim Ali himself has written that he was a hunter. He wanted to be a big game hunter. And eventually he turned out to be the first he started conversation about conservation, and he became an ornithologist. So one steps out like that and one moves to several places. Wilbur Smith's works are, because that person mentioned it, probably somebody who is very serious about Wilbur Smith. Wilbur Smith has specifically written about big game hunting, for that matter, or even the black mamba or whatever. Now, whatever he writes about, it is environment that matters. If one writes only about cobras, that doesn't mean that the person is a poisonous person. That's my point.
Surely not. Well, I'm sure you remember Madhavaya Krishnan and his column for 40 years, I think, in the Statesman.
Yes, it was.
What a phenomenal guy who never fell ill. And he used to send these long-handed sort of things by snail mail, and we didn't have anything else in those days, to Calcutta, and they published him. And he talks about, Corbett, and he talks about shooting with the gun and with the camera. He was a man with the camera anyway. And the little anecdotes that he puts out, whether it's about the gecko on the wall, or about the kind of
the poo-poo outside,
Have you had other people in the association, when you talk about literature and environment, other members of this association who have explored any of these things in whatever forms, whether it's the written form or the art forms? Have you had any such people on this bridge between literature and environment?
Yeah, in the art form, there have been several painters who have been working in this, not merely, drawing something of nature, depicting nature as such. Even Pablo Picasso, we can see the echoes of nature, because he was a very shocking sort of person, and he shocked you with this kind of, abstract cubist models. but Paul Cézanne for that matter. You can see Cézanne represented nature in a totally different way. I'm talking about Impressionists, because it is very easy to talk about Impressionists in terms of, Manet, Monet. Immediately they are beautiful. They represent nature in such a beautiful way, fine way, which you can recognize. But non-recognizable forms and how the very heart of art forms, have changed considerably over the years. And that has happened in India, in our part of the world. Even fairly recently, we have had several exhibitions of people who have non-representative, non-figurative sort of art forms. The language of art has changed considerably. Language of fiction has also changed considerably. It's not merely descriptive, as I tried to say earlier, but it becomes reflective. It goes internally and it makes you think, because ultimately it is that which matters. There is a kind of internal change, an internal harmonizing experience, which you and I and other readers will have to experience when we read something, right?
Sure. Yeah, I see that. To go back to this post-green and the question that Pooja sort of said in the beginning, plaintively, why post-green? What do you see as post-green, and what is the significance of the word post in this title that you have sort of set for yourself?
It's actually, Hari, it is something of a certain, it comes from a theoretical frame of mind.
Okay.
Like, for instance, we have been writing on humanism. Are we closing in on our time? No.
No, we have some time. We have time.
We have some fun. Okay.
Yeah, maybe now, we have about 9 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me also try to explain this. We have in the Western world, there have been something which we call Enlightenment.
Are you saying it's like post-liberalism, post-modernism, there is post-green?
Yeah, very close. Almost. The last post. It's the last post, I should say. It's not merely postmodernism for that matter. When I spoke about Enlightenment movement, I'm trying to focus on the aspect of knowledge. The aspect of, the knowledge which is equated with the scientific sort of knowledge, which actually sidelines or silences all the other art forms. In a similar way, when the whole concept of ecological writing or eco-writing or eco-criticism turned up, it was mainly focused on American and European. Right. So we wanted to bring in an aspect of, to use words which I am sure you also are familiar, race, class, and gender. Race, we talk about race, we talk about class, we talk about caste here, and we also talk about gender. Because we cannot just other things. So like nature, women are othered, nature is also othered. That is the whole aspect of othering of nature. Once you have othered something, you can dominate it. You can actually colonize it, and you can destroy it, and you need not preserve it. So that shouldn't happen. We have to internalize. So the post in that post-green is something which tries to say that there are other voices. See, I'm trying to simplify things. When I try to simplify, of course, I can make an error there because it's not simplistic that way. We are trying to focus logically as well as systematically. And in a scholarly way, we are trying to focus on some aspects of nature and nature writing, which actually require to be focused on, which is actually subaltern, which actually comes from this part of the world, So our voices are a sort of subversive voice, We are trying to, like I was trying to explain to Pooja, you turn your dosha upside down, you put it the other way around. So we are trying to overturn. We are trying to place it in a different way.
When you say we, can you tell us a little about this co-editor of yours?
Yes, a co-editor is he's a junior colleague of mine. He's working in Calcutta. He's a Bengali, and he is an English teacher working in a university there. And both of us, have been communicating with each other, and our collection will carry about 20 odd articles. Essays by diverse hands, even Europeans and even American thinkers.
That was my next question. When you said other voices, you are now gone about picking some 20 different voices, shall we say?
Sure.
Is there anything you want to tell us about that spectrum, why you chose, who you chose, or maybe you don't want to speak about it at this point?
Of course, we have to speak about it, because we chose we have specifically, in fact, the call for papers was sent to all the associations, all the ASLE newsletters in the US, in Canada, in Europe, and even in Taiwan, China. And we did get a lot of responses from all parts of the world. And then we have chosen about 20-25 as per the requirements, because we focused specifically on aspects of climate change, aspects of biodiversity and damaging, aspects of waste and garbage management. These are all very important and significant things.
I'm really glad that you said that, because, this touches our lives. You step out on the street, these are things, or you live your everyday life. These are things that are touching us. There isn't anything really as writing.
I beg to differ, because I think everything touches upon the common people. That's what I believe. It's not really perceptual differences we are calling for. Somebody who works in who's just a musician, we cannot say that he is not producing rice, so he's not creating anything. There is no capital labor involvement there. We shouldn't say that.
So you are indeed picking things like that on cities and the unlivability of cities and so on. Are you also looking at such things?
Not necessarily. We are trying to look at, not the in a sort of none of us live in a very pristine sort of environment.
No, we don't.
We cannot go to the wild like that. Thoreau or Emerson. Thoreau has written very specifically. Let me quote what Thoreau has said from my memory. I went to the woods, he says, because I wished to live deliberately, to friend only the essential parts of life, and not when I come to die realize that I had not lived. So for him, there was a reason for withdrawing into the forest, and he could go to the pristine forest. Walden is not a forest in any way. Walden is where he has built his hut and he can cook and eat. There is a raw and cooked, the dialogue there. Our own rishis, for that matter, who withdraw into Aranyakas, Upanishad rishis who withdrew there, they lived in the forest and they lived like forest people. It's not to demean the forest people or to demean the rishis in any way, but to withdraw and to go away, to realize what wilderness meant.
Talking of Thoreau, we all know that the guy wrote this book. Nobody wanted to publish it. Then he eventually finds $1,000, publishes the blessed book. 20 years or 22 years later, I think in 1870 or so, well past his demise, suddenly the book becomes, something that people listen to or read. That is one of the challenges, I guess, anyone has who is trying to see if he can push the frontiers of understanding and anticipating what is to come. So you could write this book, and for the next 20 years, you might not be read by more than 2,000 people.
More than 2,000.
Does that make you despondent? Or do you do it because you want to do it?
This could happen because, as you very rightly said, Rachel Carson, you mentioned, she was an oceanographer. She was studying ocean. And then all of a sudden, she felt that, she had to speak about what she spoke about in The Silent Spring, about insecticides, pesticides, and therein, because for her, she felt for many years, she has written extensively letters to her friends. Several, times I have thought that why should I write a book like that? My field is oceanography. Let me stick to that. But then she felt that, she had something to say to the people. And she carried that in her mind. And then ultimately she decided, okay, I'm going to write it, whether anybody reads or not. That's
4 years later, 4 years after she puts out such a seminal book, in 1967, India launches, the cruel irony, India launches the Green Revolution.
The Green Revolution. Well, 20 years.
And we do exactly what Rachel Carson told us not to be doing.
Yeah. No, but that could happen, because we shouldn't talk about technology as if people don't matter. Technology is there for people too. We have to realize. See, 20 years later, after Rachel Carson and that launch, what happened is this gentleman, a study of economics as if people matter. Small is beautiful. Small is beautiful is
absolutely Schumacher, right?
So then just imagine the reason why he mentions this is because he felt that human beings matter in this world.
Look at it, 1970, 71, Schumacher is writing this, and he talks of Gandhi again. He also talks about Gandhi, right?
Right.
In 1994, Paul Hawken writes The Ecology of Commerce,
Right.
Last year, he's published this book called something to do with, how we need to make this happen within this generation, right?
Right.
Now, you talk of a thorough and 20 years of how that book was lost, it was in oblivion until it was sort of discovered by somebody. Now, do you believe, therefore, that all writing, literature and environment, or environment and literature, or something else, also has to, sort of be imbued with this sense of immediacy and urgency on what the world needs in the next 20 years and what we need to be doing within this generation? You listen to all those guys who are talking at COP26, you come away and say, who are these people? Where are they coming from? Do they belong to the planet, or are they coming in from elsewhere and are a threat to the human, to Earth itself, Is that right?
Very much there, very much there. You got it right, because it is necessary. See, we cannot insist that a writer actually gives you an answer. Human beings have to experience this, and we have to touch the sacred. The whole concept of, my concern personally as an intellectual, as a social intellectual or a public intellectual, is that I need to recognize the quality of the sacred or the miraculous.
Right.
We have actually laid aside the whole thing. Why Rachel Carson wrote about the Silent Spring, or why Thoreau went to the Walden, or even Mahatma Gandhi for that matter, when he goes to South Africa and writes letters, and he comes here and he works there. A sense of, sublimity, a sense of sacred, a sense of, uniqueness, and a feeling for the marvelous and the mystical. That is something which is totally absent from our minds. It has been completely raked away by all these things. Why don't
Absolutely.
Anytime, if we can re-establish that, we will have our, answer to the whole thing.
I know. You said touch the sacred,
Yes.
Very lovely note that you struck on that. Yep. It's 5:50. We need to close the conversation, says Pooja. She will reprimand us if we don't. And maybe a couple of questions. Now, Pooja, you will have to help me. I haven't seen any questions or observations on the chat.
Invite them to send it. You all can continue till... basically, if any of you have questions, earlier you have all been very generous with posting your comments.
Yeah.
So while they're still there, if you have any questions, please do put them in the chat box. I'm sure they'll be happy to answer.
Sure. Well, thank you, Benedict, for that little note on the discussion. But if there are observations, thoughts, ideas, anything that can help Murali along, his journey to, to complete that anthology that he's working on, that will help him, I guess. Anything at all? Anyone? Pooja Bhula, it's up to you. You need to take this mic and the floor and see what you want to do to wrap this up. Murali, I have to connect with you. Thanks to Pooja, thanks to Ben and others at the GreenLitFest. I'm with you, and I've discovered you in some ways. We'll keep in touch. We'll see what we can do.
I'm going to pose a question to both of you, considering everyone's given me the leeway. Everyone has asked questions.
I was about to tag.
So one was to Murali, which is that, you're a painter, you're a poet, you're a fine artist, and you're an academician, and all your, work is, the common theme is nature, right? So how is it that you do these different things? How is, not everyone can actually be an academic and also a poet and, play these different hats. And Hari, I'm also going to ask you the question right now. So the question for you is this, when I read about your buildings and what you're trying to create, I think you started at a time where a lot of these things were not so out there, like now everyone is talking ESG, everyone is talking about eco-centric ways of development. Right. But I think you went the eco-centric way before. So tell us a little about that. So yeah, I think as closing remarks, just a little bit about both of you, right? Because I think everyone knows about what your thoughts are and what the work has been. So just a little bit about, what your inspirations have been in these two things.
Murali goes first.
Oh, that's very generous of you, Hari. I thought you should be, because you are a builder. You have something concrete. For me, 3-dimension doesn't matter. I'll just pick up casually a small, very brief poem of mine. And I thought, I'll just read that. This is something which I wrote about 20 years ago. But, poetry is not something that grows on a tree. It just happens, even if it is 25 years or what you wrote 5 years old, 50 years old, it doesn't make any difference. It's a small poem which I thought will be a kind of afterword to what I have been talking about in my theoretical things. As Pooja said, this could be a very simple way of reaching out to a lot of my students are also there. I can see that, or somebody whom I have taught long ago. It's called The Bleeding Tree. I just picked it up casually. It just happened in my shelf. This is a book. This appears in a collection of poems which I call Conversations with Children. And we also spoke about conversation and conservation. And we spoke about nature. So this title of this poem is The Bleeding Tree. Shall I read it? It goes like this. There is a tree that bleeds on the hill, or so they said. Each time in the valley, a tree is cut or a branch broken, a leaf plucked, it bleeds. Now I have crossed the river and taken the roving path across the valley. There is no tree where they said it stood. It must have become a piece of wood, or a chair, or a table, a window frame, or a door now. Someone has even thoughtfully gouged out its roots. There is only a mound of burned grass here. The sun is setting beyond the valley. The river has darkened, and now in the distant hills, all trees are bleeding all day.
Very lovely. So much cadence in those words. So much cadence.
Yeah.
And Murali, you inhabit a very beautiful space, and the joy of just sometimes listening, reading things of the kind that you do is in itself a destination for you. But you see, from the hurly-burly of the sort of things that I chose to do from, I would reckon, the early 80s, was actually influenced by a whole lot by J.C. Kumarappa, one of those people who came back to India in 1928, went to Bapu and said, Bapuji, I want to work now here and I want to try and see what I can do with the economics of that district, where Ahmedabad was. So Bapuji says, he laughs at him and says, what are you going to do wasting your time here? You come from MIT and Boston, having studied economics there. But to me, people like Kumarappa and what they did, and he died in 1966, so he had about 35, 36 years of his time spent in India. Post-1947, post-Gandhi's demise and so on, he continued. And the entire movement of the cooperators happened at that point in time. But by the 90s, when I was getting to look at these things, I told myself, and I get now to Pooja's question, I told myself I must try and see what I can do to possibly protect some of these, shall we say, natural ecosystems. And so I worked with various organizations, NGOs, trying to understand what watersheds are, what advocacy is, and what these people are doing. And along the way, I met one geologist who, I took a shine to the man's work. His name is Sridhar. He sits in Delhi these days and runs something called the Academy for Environics, or the Environics Trust. It's a name that we, sort of gave to this organization in 1991 when we founded the trust. And then I realized by about 1990 that this is not enough. Protecting those ecosystems is not enough, that we need to reduce the abuse of natural resources in our urban environments. By mid-90s, I said, okay, an NGO cannot do this. I have to get down to demonstrating it. And therefore, I created a company and went about doing what, Gandhiji spoke about at Tolstoy Farm when he started that in Johannesburg. And when I went down to people and I, created a little brochure in 1994, October, I think, got myself 40 acres of land without having to pay for it. I paid 100,000 rupees, which I didn't have. I borrowed that too. And so this whole, wrestle and struggle with commerce and conservation began, in the winter of 1994. And then I thought, that if you don't demonstrate it, nobody is going to take to it. Sadly, after 15, 20 years, but 22 years later, it's 2015 or 16, I said, such demonstrations of isolated, inspiring models of either living or of life, where you can, get to achieving that balance with nature and the demands you make on it on water or energy is not really impacting. I said this kind of mainstreaming of sustainability is fine, but I need to see what I can do to go away from innovating solutions to accelerating the implementation of solutions. And so, Pooja, what started in 1995 with the unlikely name for a builder company called Biodiversity Conservation India Limited, I called it then. And people used to ask me, say, what are you doing with this? You're a builder and you've got some biodiversity and some conservation. You must be some research organization, For many years, they used to say this. And after some 3 million square feet, and I don't know how many homes, maybe about 2,000 odd, and Benedict here knows some bit of what I did, I realized that it's not enough for me to do that. I need to see that I move away from it and work on what you and I will, in very simplistic ways call awareness building and public campaigns and such. But I found that, it requires a whole lot of, your need for connecting with people. At some point, when that company that I used to run was targeting about, I think it was some 2,500 homes in some 4 years, I said, what am I doing with 2,000 and 2,500 houses? It might show some 500 crore rupees and such, but I said, that is not what I set out to do. I need to now move on. And today, I can tell you after this 5-6 years, I might have impacted, I would think, about 1 million people on things that they need to be doing to implement solutions. We run something called the WOW Action Forum, the World of Water Action Forum. We are coming to Chennai, Murali. January 13th, we are launching what's called WOW Chennai, or the WOW Mission there. And what are we doing? We are making it a citizen-to-citizen forum. Pooja is coming on there. It's a signal for us to say, shut up, Yes, Pooja.
No. You can obviously conclude.
Strangely.
Pooja, between some, sorry, Murali, just hold your thought.
Strangely enough, I wanted to connect with, when I was reading your bio and looking at the kind of work which you have done, I was just looking at ecology and economics and the connection with the kind of thing which you were trying to do. And I picked up 3 points from there. Let me just point it out to you. Maybe this is of some interconnection. Now, the human well-being, according to ecological environmentalists, depends on 3 categories of value. I was surprised because when you talk about value in economics, what are these categories of values? One, they say economic efficiency, which I'm sure all of you are so easily, because optimal resource management. This is what happens when you have interface with nature. Nature is always there. You don't have to invest capital. It is there. You can draw it, and then you can have an optimal resource as a builder or as a person who works on it in different ways. Or the second point is equitable distribution. They talk about equity and equitable distribution. It has to be equity. I don't know whether it still is implied. There is no implication of equitability. Unequal kind of division, unequal kind of division. That's what happens for a man in the street. The innumerable, look at I don't want to call our world, developed, undeveloped, or poverty-stricken, or third world, or fourth world, or whatever.
Absolutely.
We are a world which is trying to, live in a different way. Sure. We have the whole concept of sustainability, which actually brings me to the third point, which I think many of us have sidelined. That is non-economic values. Non-economic values, which are usually taken from religion, spirituality, and aesthetics. Yeah. I wish we could all bring this.
The fourth value. How on earth did I not get to knowing you, Murali? Because the fourth cornerstone of the 4 E's that you talked about is endogenity. Yes. How local can you get on materials, on skills, and everything else? Right. And that reminds me of Patrick Geddes.
Yes.
Puja Bhula, this conversation can go on for 8 hours, right?
For ages.
So, so we have to stop.
I have 2 things to say here.
Yes,
One is that the beauty of a Green Literature Festival or any good festival is that you end up making friends with people. And I see people who want to continue to talk. So I'm sure this conversation will go on offline as well. And the other thing is that as someone who's hosting, you're always the demon asking people to keep time. So I think that's the beauty of any festival.
I
being a host.
I should thank you. But some comments
you have to be the bad girl. Often I play that role, Pooja. I play the bad boy's role. Sorry, Murali.
I think that's the reason we chose you today.
No, I cut Murali. Murali, you were saying something. Sorry.
No. I was just saying that there is a comment which has come, which says that Mother Nature. There is a relationship with us. Who in the world does not understand the role of mother?
Mr. Murali,
That I think is a mothering of nature.
I'm going to interrupt you here.
Thank you very much.
I'm going to put down their email IDs here, and I'm sure they want to actually write back to you and answer you. They'll be very happy to do so.
Yep.
But because all our panelists for the next session have arrived, I'm going to, like I said, wear the demon hat for now.
I haven't thanked yet. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Apologies, and we can't have them wait. Please close this session, Pooja. Delight, absolute delight, spending these 55 minutes with Murali and Pooja, Ben, and everybody else. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Pooja. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. All right.
Yeah,
I'll definitely put both your IDs.
Right.
All right. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.